This was by far my most technical interview that I have had to date on this show, and I was here for it the whole time. My interview was with Brian Doyle from VCIO Toolbox. Always good to meet another Brian. But what was so fun about today's interview is we talked about actually increasing revenue inside of your existing customer base. Now, y'all probably know me. I'm really big into net new logos. That's sort of the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. But I think it's very important as this industry continues to evolve, especially right now in the kind of key pivotal moments that we're in, you got to figure out how to climb higher up the totem pole with your clients. And the best way to do that is by introducing vCISO services. We talked about the differences between a vCIO and a vCISO, how to sort of think through building that vCISO function and go-to-market function, and then how to actually tactically create those opportunities with your MSP clients. Let's do it. Brian Doyle, yet another Brian who spells his name the right way. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no wise, man. I don't know what that's all about, but I'm glad that I'm here sharing the time with another kindred spirit boasting an I in their name.
Right. If you're not named Brian, then you don't know what we're talking about. But if you are named Brian, you understand. And you also know the pain of people writing hello brain in your emails.
Yes, more often than not, but I take it as a compliment.
Yeah, right. Man, we haven't talked since I did your podcast, I think, which had to be 6 months ago.
Yeah, right? I think it was right after we were all out at IT Nation, which I think is the last time I saw you live.
Jeez. Yeah. Okay. So a long time ago, right? We were just catching up a little bit kind of in the moments before we started recording and realized, you know what, let's save it all for the hot mic. But it sounds like some exciting things are happening with you guys. Just real quick, for anybody who isn't familiar with your, give us the real quick, like who you are in the channel and
sure.
For anybody who doesn't know.
Sure. So VCIO Toolbox is a unified account management and advisory platform. It's really been built to handle all the consultative needs that an MSP might have. So we have the ability to do business reviews, manage risk, produce framework assessments on the governance, risk, and compliance side of things. And while we have two distinct products, the VCIO account management suite and our Cybrance GRC suite, they merge in the middle and they unify around strategy, roadmap, and risk. So you never get out of sync no matter which team might be talking to a customer.
So there you go. I think we can go ahead and wrap it up here. No, it's a great summary of what VCIO Toolbox is. You were the first one that I ever came across. When I was in my MSP, we didn't have like a QBR tool. Yeah. And I know that's sort of like, that's just one of the things that you guys do, but I was so relieved when I saw somebody was doing something to make QBRs easier that I sent you a bunch of referrals right when I started out. Was like, oh, you guys just need to, you guys need to do this. Because we were spending 1, 2, 3 hours of prep per QBR.
Oh, easily.
But I don't want to talk about QBRs though. I want to talk to you about something that is hot right now. And I don't think there's a whole lot of people that I actually trust to give an interesting and helpful take on it, which is vCISO. Because it's this interesting spoke right in the middle of like managed services, GRC, MSSP, kind of, right? Yep. And in fact, and some people are just, they're spinning up entire go-to-market motions, entire products separate from their MSP stack as a vCISO. But some people say vCISO is that's baseline managed services. Some people say that that's their super platinum plan. I want to sort of level the playing field as somebody who's worked at an MSP, or you owned an MSP, right?
Yeah, I was an MSP leader or owner for a number of years. And then after we had a successful exit, I had the opportunity to then work for an MSP that was actually working more in the enterprise space. And in both realms, I worked with data centers, which is really where the compliance and the security story originated for me.
Right. Okay, so talk to me. I'm going to give you a really broad. This is an awful question, the way I'm about to phrase it, but I'm going to you're going to save me. So what the hell is going on with vCISO services? How should an MSP, especially an up and coming MSP, be thinking about it? And talk to me a little bit there.
So let's take a kind of a step back, right? And kind of talk about the separation between VCIO and VCSO just for a minute, if we could.
Yeah.
The VCIO has really been kind of positioned and pigeonholed into the account management bucket of late, right? Certainly we're seeing more and more customers that are realizing it's time to evolve their quarterly business reviews. Asset, refresh is only a part of the conversation, that kind of thing. And they're starting to get more strategic. Inside those business reviews, we of course look at security, but I've always looked at a business review or the VCIO side of the advisory story, if you will, as being more around day-to-day operations. This is what you look like right now, current state of the infrastructure, current gap analysis of your environment. It takes into account security. Almost everything we're talking about is managed by the MSP. And then we're showing where the gaps are and hopefully generating some roadmaps so we can make a little money in the process as well, right? So that, I think, in a very short story sums up the traditional QBR. Where VCSO comes in is takes all that to the next step. And really what it means is, hey, security is part of life, and we all know that, and it's never going to go out of style. But now we got to get a little bit better at how we manage security. Governance is a very hot word you're hearing out in the marketplace today, and governance is just simply oversight. Are we doing the things that our policies and procedures say we're supposed to be doing? And the reason VCSO is becoming a little bit more important in the marketplace is really because cyber liability is becoming much more talked about topic. I think there's not an MSP in the world that probably doesn't have an alignment with a cybersecurity company, but it's more about the challenges of cybersecurity. We did a recent webinar, 4 out of 10 claims get rejected. Now, they don't get rejected wholly, but oftentimes they have carve-outs. And what that means is they're not getting the full brunt of the claim. So this is all that compliance requirements. Candidly, it's just even making sure that you've got strong security across your organization or what's driving the VCSO story. Now, what should the VCSO do? That's a different conversation, and we can definitely dive into that.
Right. Well, I really appreciate that differentiation, because CISO is kind of like MSSP. A lot of people just they're like, if I buy one more tool, I can add an extra S to my acronym. But to your point, even if you were to say a VCIO's job is to provide templated security practices, the VCSO's job is to actually maintain that those things are being interstitially woven into the business, that users are using those protocols, auditing against those protocols, things like that, right? Or is that an over-reduction?
No. I think that's a great statement on what it's supposed to be, because it really is adding that governance layer, that oversight layer. But it's also, when you look at the frameworks that we assess, everybody's familiar with CIS, ISO, HIPAA, and others. Those also usually require information coming from your customers. So it's also a much more collaborative process, a much more consultative process than the business review as well. So when you look at kind of where you were starting from, hey, we can put one more thing in the stack and we're an MSSP. There's kind of a line there too. Absolutely. You can build out a nice security program, whether you consider yourself an MSP or an MSSP. You can put in those tools that then can get you the things that you need. It can identify when issues are happening. It can help you contain those issues, right? All the things that go into the NIST stack. But what it doesn't take into account is people and process. And when you look at most of the framework assessments out there, 2/3 of it's about people and process and policy. And only a third of it is really about technical configurations. So you can bring in that stuff automated. That's great. But then you have to have somebody, i.e. the VCSO, who has enough skill and talent to be able to go out there and ask questions, work with the team to craft policies, craft procedures if they don't exist today, to help them become compliant if that's a requirement for them, or hopefully to help them better build a better security program so they don't end up having one of those carve-outs or one of those rejected claims.
Right. Which, there's so many threads I want to pull on. I'm on the rejected claims. You might not know these specifics based on that study, but are we talking like sublimits basically that we get hit because of some contingent lack of something?
It's more this. It was an erroneous application. So it's applications that are erroneous but not intentional, right? Because there's intentional fraud, but then there's accidental I won't call it fraud, but accidental stuff that occurs. Some of the carve outs are because you weren't, some of the folks filling out those questionnaires weren't 100% correct in their responses, meaning, let's just use MFA as a standard. Customer logs in every day with MFA. So they're like, yeah, we have MFA. And they do. They have MFA on most of their critical systems. But then you got the marketing department out there who likes to try new tools, right? And generally when they try those tools, they're uploading personally identifiable information depending on what state you're in. That could be as simple as name and phone number or name and email, right? So they put those things into a marketing app. That becomes the one that's breached. And that becomes the one a claim is pushed against. If, this is that whole shadow IT problem. If you don't know it exists, you can't secure it. So the insurance companies aren't coming at them going, look, you maliciously lied to me. They're like, hey, unfortunately, that falls out of scope. So we're going to carve out part of the claim or we're going to reject the claim on that basis. So this is more about the vCISO guiding them and going, look, here's everything that's in play. And if you're going to answer X on this, this cybersecurity insurance summary, understand this is going to encompass anything your team touches, including shadow IT as an example.
Right. And I like that this is a side note, but I like that the narrative around shadow IT is evolving, because the narrative was essentially like, hey, shadow IT is like, it's a heinous crime if there's anything you can't see. When in reality, I think now it's pivoting towards, okay, look, there's going to be stuff that you don't know about because people are dumb. So now the conversation is, how do we manage this topic of shadow IT, rather than how do we pretend it never happens or it's never going to happen?
Brian, you are singing you're singing my hymn right here, because what it really comes down to is you've got to create a culture of cybersecurity awareness. Right. People have to be empowered when they make a mistake to come to the team and say, hey, this just happened, not feel like they're going to get their lunch eaten for it. We've all clicked on a phishing email. I mean, I've been around for 30 years in this industry. I know what I'm supposed to do and what I'm not supposed to do. You don't think in times of being busy, I haven't clicked on that famous link at some point in my life, or I haven't, skipped a security awareness training or not followed a best practice there. So the truth is, you've got to really empower your employees and say, look, we're in this together. If you do something accidentally wrong, the faster you tell us about it, the faster we can get out in front of it, the quicker we can contain it, and it probably doesn't become a bigger problem. And that's a win for all of us. It's the same with shadow IT. If marketing doesn't feel like they're going to be getting their hands slapped, right, as part of this process, or have to go through a big vendor vet process to just do a trial, and engages IT and says, hey, we want to try this new app, IT might say to them, hey, do you got some dummy data you can put in there first? Or that's cool. Can you enable 2FA from day one on that? That way, if you convert, we're good there. It just requires this conversation, but it requires people to have that awareness that, hey, cybersecurity and being vigilant's all our responsibility, not just IT's responsibility.
Right. I remember being in a conversation one time with this chief compliance officer for enterprise business, and they were talking about their code of conduct. And I said to them, I was in this meeting, there was like 3 or 4 people on the compliance team. And I was like, hey, you guys know that salespeople don't read codes of conduct, right? And they looked at me like I had just, said something debaucherous. I'm like, hey, yeah, no, they don't. I've never read a code of conduct in my life. And because the product we were selling was basically just-in-time ethics and compliance training made available when people need it, rather than assuming or operating under this completely ridiculous expectation that thousands of employees are going to read your 40-page code of conduct every 90 days just to refresh themselves. It's just unrealistic, right? So now that I think IT companies, IT people are becoming less rigid, I think against their own, like, they're kicking and screaming as they go, but it feels like MSPs are like, look, we're going to have to make lower friction SOPs for people to try stuff out. It can't be like, hey, hang on, well, let's build a full pre-execution environment before you get this Canva license. Like, this is not going to happen, right? So coming to the table and helping actually evolve what it means to manage people's IT as the user experience of working with IT evolves. So that's very helpful. I think it's a really good starting point of what the hell is vCISO services. And I really appreciate your differentiation with vCIO. But now let's talk about what I really want to talk about. How do we sell this crap?
Well, let's kind of start out with what's included in the vCISO program, right? So when you're looking at a vCISO role, whether that's a couple people sitting over the top of this service or what it is, it usually includes a few things. It includes an annual framework assessment, right? You're going to gauge yourself and try to stand up your security posture against one of the frameworks that are out in the marketplace. That could be CIS, NIST, if you're not regulatory bound, or obviously something regulatory bound. It's going to be working on a risk plan with the customer as well, and identifying from those frameworks where the gaps are, and then adding impact and probability ratings to it so you can determine and prioritize which risk is biggest to the company. And then look beyond what usually comes out of an assessment, even think about fire, flood, and earthquake considerations. I know you're West Coast, Brian. Fire and earthquake is a big deal for you. I'm on the East Coast. Hurricanes are usually a bigger problem for me, right? So every area has a different thing that they have to do, but can impact system availability, which is about the equivalent of security, because if you can't be online, it's the same as having a breach for many of your customers, right? And then you have to assess the MSP stack, or assess the tool stack as part of this process too. Now, if you're an MSP, you're doing that as you provide your services. But what about the vCISO that's acquiring a company that has their own security tools or co-managed situations? Now you're going to look at the security stack and assess that annually just to make sure that the tools are doing what you expect. It's building policy and procedure and identifying where those gaps are. And that's becoming a bigger conversation in the MSP world over the last few years, especially with the proliferation of AI and AI policies all of a sudden having to come into customers' handbooks. So there's a variety of different services that you have to do under the vCISO umbrella that once you put them together really builds this service layer. And then when you're going out to sell it to the customer, it's really taking a step back and going, hey, it's easy. I think it's easier with compliance-bound customers because they already have to do the pre-audit step with you usually. And that usually comes with a pretty hefty cost. For those that aren't aware, just doing a simple SOC 2 assessment as an example, those things usually cost $25,000 just with your auditor. So they can range up to $50,000, $60,000 when you think about your own labor and engaging. An MSP can now come in with a fractional vCIO or vCISO service, and start working with the customer to prepare throughout the year. Get those controls ready, build out the baseline assessment, and then iterate on it throughout the year as they make improvements. So now instead of every year it becoming this daunting assessment task, they're really maintaining a living, breathing document. And now you can take some of those fees that you were going to charge before, divide them by 12 and increase them by 20 or 30%. And now you've created a service. So, when it's somebody that's regulatory, it's pretty easy to pull back and go, hey, instead of this big bang flash event, let's make it an ongoing throughout the year event. Let's work on curating policies and procedures and really giving them a nice deliverable as well. Could include third-party risk management as well, where you're actually acting as the vendor risk manager on behalf of the customer. Now, when it's not regulated, it's really talking about how confidential do you want to keep the information? Do you want to build a culture of cyber awareness? And are you worried about what your claim not being paid out is going to be? And again, a risk analysis is great for this, or a business impact analysis, where you can really sit down and say, what's the cost of downtime for you? What's the cost for this system to be down? How many days could you really live and weather the storm for it being down? Is it less than one? You definitely need a vCISO service. Is it 2 or 3? So, it takes a little of expansion, and then you've got to have a customer that's open to it. I'll close on that. If they're really security resistant, you got to break down the first wall, which is you got to get these tools in to kind of increase that, or get them doing MFA across the board and not keeping the 80-year-old lawyer that started the company out of MFA realm. And once you get past that, then you can really start honing in on who the folks are vCISO targets. Right.
I really like those three kind of indicators. Really, we're talking about buying indicators there of like, I like the idea of positioning ourselves as we are going to impact your company culture with new process and procedure. So does your culture have the appetite? Does the culture have the capacity to mature in this way. Are you okay with changing the way that people talk about technology, and we're thinking much more about, I like that, like a security culture rather than fighting against culture and slowing everything down? Because let me tell you this thing that every MSP owner listening is going to cringe at this. But here's the reality, man. As an end user, you think about IT on the spectrum of the more IT is involved, the harder it is to do my job. That's what we feel as end users, right? Okay, now I got to check in. Oh, hang on. I got to get this effing token on my phone. And now I got to take a picture of my face so they know that it's me. And in 60 seconds, my email is going to time out. And I got to keep changing my passwords. And my 1Password, I have a password for my 1Password. So for my password manager. So what's the difference in... And it's like you call IT and they're like, well, did you do this? Did you triage this? Did you read this article and then call me if it hasn't? It's like, give me I hate these. They just make it so much harder. And honestly, I think that's our fault. I think that we have culturally positioned ourselves as like adversaries to the user because the MSPs think of users as kind of the problem.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so, I do too well, unfortunately.
So how do we, what does it look like? I'm kind of just wondering this aloud, and I would love if you have thoughts, but like, if we're trying to help our clients, I'm sort of presuming that the average VC sale is sort of an upsell to an existing MSP client. That's what I see, at least the most common, right?
In most cases, and it can also come from somebody that's contracting you for a one-off, regulatory compliance assessment, and then you can build that relationship. But I think you're spot on. Most of this is net expansion revenue in the big scheme of things.
Yeah, so we're going to come back to that later because I want to talk about sort of the revenue ladder of an MSP and how to think about that as a future-proofing the business. But if we've got users who, in their mind, we are the bad guy, if you will. The culture is not where we want to be. Everybody says that if you get a difficult client, you should just fire them. And I think that's almost never actually true. It's like saying, I got in a fight with my wife, so I left her. Give me a break. You just have conflict resolution skills and you learn basic emotional intelligence and learn how to set boundaries, and then, hey, look, all your relationships get better. So as you evolve the relationship, let's say the relationship is not where you want it to be for them to have an appetite for VCSO services, but their business case is so strong. It's like, man, we would save them so much risk, and it's like not even that much more expensive against their budget to put this in. What does it look like as a technology partner to help steer a culture to be more security minded?
So you got to set the table early, right? And one of the things that, I see, it's funny, I've been following a lot of stuff on LinkedIn lately, and I've been seeing a lot of people talking about how you have to get more strategic with your customers, right? This is the thing I'm seeing everywhere. And I'm on a little bit of a rant here, Brian, because I'm sitting here going, man, strategy has been core fundamental component of VCIO toolbox, but quite frankly, me, since day one. But I'm often reminded I've come from the business side of the house first and became technical later. And some of the technical people will value technical conversations over the business conversations in some respects. But where I'm going with this is you got to start kind of shifting the pendulum in your conversation with your customer. You got to get past that gatekeeper, right? We often get pigeonholed with that one person, the office manager, whoever's been delegated to be our handler. And you've really got to work with them to build a strategic plan, because that'll help them understand that we need to bring others into the conversation. Hey, I'm sure you just shared some business goals and challenges your company is facing, but you're not probably sharing with me everybody's view of the goals and challenges. And when you really think, I'm going to go first to the VCIO role because it leads to the VCSO role. The VCIO has got to be building a better relationship across the organization. Now, this takes time, and that's always a challenge too in the MSP world. But you really got to know everybody. I have this graphic that I share where it's called the mindset of the VCIO. And it's really talking about how you have to interact with the CEO, with the CFO. If you're in a co-managed situation, what the IT department's thinking. If you're not, the HR department, the end user community. And then on top of that, the line of business managers who tend to be closest to the technology problems, even closer than most of the people you're talking to in your room. And when you can start understanding how they functionally work, you can start talking their language. And then when you can start talking their language a little bit, that's where you gain trust. And that's a big part of this, right? We know that in the MSP world, there are customers that value us as trusted partners and really believe in everything that we say and think of us as part management consultant as well. And then we have a set of customers, these might be the ones you're just referring to, that just think of us as a commodity. And we have to break that fourth wall, get past that commodity conversation, and really get more strategic. Now, when you do that, you're setting the tone to get to that vCISO layer. Because oftentimes you got to get the communication plan in play first and get the customer elevating your perception and showing that you're an extension of their leadership team, especially if we're holding the CIO role. And then it becomes much easier to go, okay, guys, now we've got the tooling in place, but how's the people and process side of things? And that's really where the vCISO service sings. Yes, we're still going to look at tooling. And yes, when there's, security events, they're going to be the lead in jumping into a lot of that. But a lot of what they are doing is also helping these companies build a review and governance structure. Make sure that they're, regularly looking at policies, that they're not open to legal issues too. And those are some of the bigger things that a vCISO does. So hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of how you can get into a customer. You've got to build that relationship, and sometimes it takes 2 steps. This could take a year, but right now we're all in that infancy stage anyway.
Right.
I know when I was an MSP, I wanted money today, and I also wanted it a year from today.
Right. Yeah, right. I'm thinking of, a shout out to Jesse Miller from Power Grid, who's one of the few people who's like helping people build a go-to-market motion for vCISO offering. There's your free plug, Jesse. You're welcome. This is a part of a bigger conversation. I think what we're talking about is these are all manifestations of a larger conversation in the overall evolution of the industry, which is like you've heard it said before that you should sell managed services from the boardroom, not from the server room. Yeah. And I don't really want to talk about AI because I'm so sick of talking about AI, but I do think it's worth at least mentioning as the future of managed services evolves. Do you see vCISO as a way of future-proofing an MSP, or do you see it as, if you've got a solid MSP, do you see it as a diversion?
I see advisory as a way to future-proof an MSP, right? And that's kind of building some of the soft skills. And I'm not saying that directly just as Brian Doyle. There's studies out there that have done it. I'll give a shout out to Jay McBain and Canalysis, right? They put together a study that showed some really intriguing numbers that MSPs should take heed to. In, I think it was 2020, the entire channel accounted for $3.5 billion in GDP. That number is going to grow to $7 billion in 2030 was the number. The MSP community was getting about $2 billion, or the channel community was getting about $2 billion of that channel or that overall technology spend. In 2020, it's only supposed to go to $2.3 billion in 2030. So we just saw the GDP of overall technology doubling, but the channel's only increasing by 200 million. And the reason for that is things like the expansion of marketplaces, the Pax8s of the world, the other marketplaces that are jumping into the fray. The fact that more of the vendors are going back to direct models, especially for their enterprise accounts and large or medium accounts. So this is taking some money off the table for the MSP, at least from a product, service, and licensing perspective, right? But the good news is 90% of those deals are expected to be partner facilitated, which means they're high value service opportunities. And when you look at that, if you can get better at the C level, getting engaged with those customers and being part of the planning effort too, you're going to be managing over those different projects. Yes, there's always going to be implementation work, but we already have seen the evolution from break fix to cloud model to now what's next, right? And I think a lot of it's going to be these soft services that you can build around these projects and know that you're going to be giving up some of the hardware software sale.
I think you're hitting something really profoundly important from the sales perspective here. And like in the 2000s, I remember Rogers, the guy from Chartech, saying something like, if you wore a pocket protector and glasses, they'd pay you whatever you wanted.
Yep.
Because it was just a very different, we're in the tech boom and all of that, and IT was big. It was a project driven industry. And we pivoted somewhere in the 2000s now towards, of course, the managed service model. I don't know the current number, but I know that over half of the eligible service-based businesses are really relying on an MSP already. Yep. Even back in 2017, 18, there were still a lot of people who didn't have anything. And so you'd have to educate them on what an MSP even was.
Exactly.
Which actually was a much harder sale, to be honest. It was a much harder sale to be a first MSP than to take over for a crappy MSP. That's the easiest sale you can find, is somebody who has a bad MSP. But as again, I'm just going to say that if any part of our business is going to be taken by AI, it's tier 1 support, right? It's your licensing management. Yep. If the stickiness of your business is only because you sell them their XDR and their Microsoft licensing, you're in for a big, big, big awakening in a couple of years when they don't need you for that at all. And when Pax8 and all these people can start having enough market share, or all these vendors, I should say, will sell direct, even to the SMB, as it becomes more commonplace to sort of bundle together. I don't think we're that far away from full tech stack bundles that you can buy direct if you have partnerships with a lot of these vendors.
Well, there's also a lot of big players coming into the game too, right?
Right.
There's full-scale organizations, the Xeroxes of the world as an example, that are building, MSP groups too, that can weather a little bit more of the financial storm to get things going at a higher level, more automated level.
Right. And frankly, they're going to out-purchase power you all day on the licensing, and they can afford to make licensing a loss leader. So you're never going to make your real money 40 cents at a time selling your RMM agents and stuff. So you've got to think about especially if you're a startup MSP, which there's a ton of MSPs starting right now. So many. I talk all the time to people who are starting out, and they're usually mid-level management at another MSP, and they go, I could do this better. I've given this guy enough of my time, and they go and start their own.
Yep.
I'm not telling you not to do that, but what I'm saying is you got to realize 10 years ago, the industry it wasn't even really a thing. 10 years ago, managed services was like a marketing term made up to try to get people to pay every month. It started as a marketing term and then it became a thing, right? Same with MSSP. It was 100% BS marketing term at the beginning. There was no way of actually defining the difference in the late 20-teens.
And most customers don't even know those.
Right.
Those are more internal labels than they are external labels. There's very few customers going, you know what, I got to get tomorrow an MSP.
But even, you're exactly right. But even internally, if you asked 3 people what the difference was, they would give you 3 completely different answers, right? Because it was a term made up by some vendor trying to get into your stack. Just like that's why most of anything happens in the channel. So point is that the industry is going to evolve. It's not going to go away. As you see, tech spend is not going to go down.
No,
it's not going to go down, but businesses' relationship with technology is going to change. And so I'm having this conversation a lot with companies who are just this week, an ISP turned MSP, under this assumption that an ISP client, like if there's somebody's buying internet from you, then they're definitely going to buy technology from you. But you're so low on the totem pole as an ISP or as a VoIP vendor or a copier vendor. A lot of the people they have separate divisions. They're trying to build up an MSP offering. But what's great about being an MSP is that you have a much higher seat at the table. You're much closer to the head already. And the highest you could get is actually functioning as a peer to the C-suite, because most C-suite executives don't really care about the MSP. Like your point, you're usually liaising with an intermediate administrator, a manager. Sometimes it's a COO, but usually it's a performative relationship that's usually you're liaising with a lower level, mid-level employee. But a VCSO, they're presenting things that's going to change what the CEO does. And that's why I think it's not just a cute idea for an upsell for managed services. I think it's the future of managed services.
Well, let's take what you just said there and let's talk about, let's drive into why that's become that way. So, I got some gray hair on my head, so I've been around here for a little while. And what I mean by that is when you look at the system, I could tell you 2 or 3 different times that I've been in is this the end of MSP conversations, right? Is this going to change the world? You go back to the 2000s, like you were saying, we made most of our money selling exchange servers and managing exchange servers. And obviously when Office 365 came out and we were all going to get $1 a box as our markup, everybody was, crying from the rooftops. But really what's happened is there's a continuing transition, and the transition's twofold. One is technology continues to evolve. We have to stay up on it, and we have to find and reinvent ourselves when new cycles come up every 5 to 6 years. The other thing is we got to start thinking differently about who our buyer is as well. I'm going to take a step back to what you talked about, Brian, back in the 2000s. A lot of what made those pencil protector guys so important was the fact that the buyers had no technology knowledge. They hadn't really used computers in most of their career. This was relatively new. I mean, really, even up to 2000 when the dot-com boom came, there was still plenty of offices that hadn't even gotten their first LAN yet, So there was a lot of educating them to why you need to buy this and what it's going to do for you. Now, the difference today is we've got smarter buyers. Folks like you, Brian, who are half generation younger than me, are digital natives. You've had a computer from, probably the day you started school. And as a result, you're not looking at it the same way. You're not like, tell me what this can do for me. You're looking at it and saying, how can it do more for me? Now, back in the 2010s to 2020s, everything was about productivity and efficiency. I mean, security's always been an underlying current, don't get me wrong. But we just didn't have as much nascent threats coming from the external factors that we did today. And we didn't have as much that inside users could break in many cases, right?
Yeah.
So those threats, the hackers are one step ahead of us, all the great things that we know out there. But those threats weren't there. So we had a very good efficiency story going. Hey, this is what can make you do it faster. This is what can increase your productivity for your employees. And that was where a lot of focus is. Now it's a combination of all those efforts. It's how can we be more efficient? But to do that, how can we integrate more and be more automated? Well, obviously, the more we integrate, we're introducing new security vulnerabilities. So now, how do we better secure this stuff? Security is never going to go out of style. That's going to be part of our world till no more is. But then there's also, again, not getting on the AI automation bandwagon, but everybody is trying to automate more. So in our leadership roles, we got to understand their workflows better. And where can automation benefit them? And where could systems talk better together? And how do we bring that as an offering? Security. How do we make sure security is happening and staying consistent? It's one thing to put security awareness training in, but if nobody's looking up to see who's taken their training, who's clicked on the phishing, and then talking to those that are repeat offenders, you might as well not even pay for the security awareness training, right? So you need to have that level of governance, and that's a huge opportunity for the MSPs to come in there and offload some of those things for the customer, or at least help educate them on doing things better. And then as we continue to move forward, there's going to be the next great thing, and we're going to get an opportunity to get into that. I mean, just not that many MSPs are getting involved in this, but just the sheer amount of data that's being created and data analytics. We're touching the surface in our security programs with file management and DLP and, trying to understand data loss. But there's a huge opportunity for building, data programs around this if you're that aggressive MSP. Right. The world's your oyster. There's a ton to do. You just got to figure out which column you want to be in.
Right. So to the MSP owner who's listening to this going, yeah, I have a vCISO function, or I want to build a vCISO function, or I want my MSP to be cutting edge. And
yep.
I think it's a very real time to reinvent. I've been saying this a bunch, and I don't think people understand what I'm really saying. I said this on Jeff Newton's podcast. I said, if nobody's buying your product, sell something better.
Yep.
So the beautiful thing about MSP being a made-up term is that managed services can be whatever you want it to be. You know what I mean? Like if maybe you merge together and say, hey, the average IT company just sells you a bunch of licenses and every month just sees if you logged into it, and then they trained an AI to send you reminder emails to take your training. What do you need that for? We're a real IT partner where we bake in actual security and governance. And you basically just merged an MSP stack and a vCISO stack and say, that's why we start at $250 a user per month, and we're not sorry. And we will save you so much money in the long run, it's not even funny, because we actually bake in the human power required to be a true technology partner. versus every MSP out there is just basically trying to never talk to another person again, and they're automating all their customer service. Well, you're going to go out of business because somebody who I trained is going to come eat your lunch when you realize that clients actually need a real tech partner, not just a glorified value-added reseller, which is what so many MSPs are. But anyway, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's very similar to what you're saying there. It's you've got to embed yourself into the company. You've got to show them where the value is. It's not the sexy work oftentimes, right? It's the oversight. Oversight work's not sexy, but it's required, especially if somebody's got a CMMC contract that's worth $10 million a year. And if they fall outside that scope, they could be in jeopardy of losing that contract. So we have to look at, back when I first started selling, when we were selling computers, we were always doing ROI calculators because, when we were asking people to buy servers at a time that they were 40 grand and desktops were $3,000 a piece, we had to have ROI calculators. It's almost time to do the same thing now, but looking at it from that risk lens of what could you lose if you don't do this, that business impact summary. And really, when you start looking at how to roll this out as an MSP, you got to say to yourself, can I really do this yet? Or do I got to scope myself up? If you don't really understand the regulations yourself or what that policy and procedures mean, that's okay. Many don't because they're on the tactical side. Bring in an outside VC to do this work. Partner with that company because most of those companies don't want your core MSP business anyway, or find an independent consultant and then work on getting the training for your team. Have some of your folks that are really interested in security and want to become more consultative, take on some of your smaller customers and do it in that fashion. You will get there quickly. It doesn't take a lot of time to kind of ramp up to do some of these things that you're doing in kind of a governance as a service program. But it does require at least some level of understanding of what the regulations mean, what they're looking for evidence. How can you test and prove that this control is really doing that? And that comes with time, practice. But if you don't have it, go outside.
Right. So, I mean, that's really good advice for what do I do right now if I need to sell this or if I need to develop this. Yep. But do you have any, I want to get really specific with you for a second.
Sure.
Do you have any talk track advice? So we talked about theoretically, strategically, what's the best way to sell it is to get in early, open the build good, solid communication, establish trust. Assuming that those things are within the person's control and those things are happening, they love you. How does the MSP go to them and say, I need to charge you an extra $2,000 a month to start? How do they explain it without it sounding like I've been halfway doing my job and now I need you to pay me more so that I do my job all the way?
Well, you have to do it from that needs basis, right? That we talked about. Assuming everything that you had happen there, you're already setting the table, you're building the relationship. You should be having some level of conversation there on where the starts and stops are. Hey, but remember, Mr. Customer, right now we only take you as far as monitoring the security on the things that we've put in. We're not necessarily talking to your people, or, there are little things that you can sprinkle into the conversation that kind of shows that there's a fence on what you're doing under this. And then you got to understand, this is good old salesmanship 101, but you got to ask the discovery questions that are going to lead you to a VCSO program. Are you guys worried about losing any contracts if you don't hit compliance? Are you worried that if a security incident happens, you might not get your claim paid? Are you worried that you've got the best security in place? Do ask questions that have nothing to do with them giving you an opinion, just fact. Hey, when was the last time you updated the policies in your handbook? Most of your customers haven't updated those policies probably since the day they built that handbook. And AI is just one example, even if you're, not a huge fan or don't want to get into the specifics, so to speak, of it all. The reality is you have to have an AI user policy of something. Otherwise, people could just do their work, theoretically from AI without checking it, right? So people are building AI policies. They're building training policies around security and awareness training, and they're putting more teeth in it today. And if the customer hasn't looked at those things, you could say, hey, let's take a look at your policies. I won't be making any changes, but I'll be able to tell you where some weak points are. And then you can pivot into it. And that's how you can grow a VCSO program. Hey, we stay on top of the policies. We're going to make sure we measure you to a standard industry framework so we can make sure that those gaps are covered. So you don't have any risk of, or you reduce the risk of a claim not being paid out in full. And that's really where you have to pivot. So you have to do like any sales effort. You got to go get some facts. But if you can get the right facts, like they haven't looked at a policy in 2 years, or they have a contract that ties to CMMC and they've really never gone through that process before, or they're just, they handle sensitive data. We know which companies of ours are holding sensitive data. Our doctors' offices have all our medical records, right?
Yeah.
What would be the reputation risk if that stuff got out? And are you sure you've got the doors closed, right? And that's really what starts opening up the door to a VCSO chat.
That's such a good piece of advice, Brian. Go to ask them this, hey, when's the last time you updated your employee policies? I don't know. Do you mind if I just give them a look over? And you read them and you look for, there's your gap analysis right there to go, okay, so it looks like you don't have any employee policy for AI. So right now, do your employees know not to load proprietary information into ChatGPT?
Yeah.
Do they know what they can and can't say to ChatGPT? Do they know what they can and can't say to Alexa? Oh, they don't. Okay. And then there's your gap and you go, well, listen, I don't have a policy to write for you today. However, keep in mind that if I were your chief information security officer, what I would be doing is not only evaluating policies like this, I could help you write them, help you execute them, help you track against them. And now you've got a talk track that's actually relevant because you've exposed a potential problem. Do also keep in mind that what we're talking about it plays very well when you have some existing trust or you're an existing client. You're doing your job by revealing problems if they're your client. If they're not your client, you want to be very tactful about how you reveal problems because it turns into FUD really quick. If you are just, hey, if you don't hire me, you're going to die, is kind of how they'll interpret it if you're not careful, right?
Well, again, it goes back to what I said earlier about a risk analysis, right? When you do a risk analysis, you're really looking at the risks the customer faces and you're generating a risk score based off of how likely it is to happen based on the way they're architected and what the unique impact would be to their organization if that risk happened. And when you build something like that, it's not you necessarily telling them anymore. It's just, here's your reality. This is what you're facing. Do with it what you will. A customer can accept any of those risks as well. But, from my seat, you always, as an MSP, want to track that because it goes from a shared responsibility to their responsibility. And that's important as well. But the point is, when you get those kind of that information going like that, you can really, I won't say manipulate it in a way, but display it in a way that can drive what the customer didn't know. Because just like when we first sold managed services, nobody thought they needed an MSP. Mm-hmm. Just like that, it's not like they were sitting in their office going, we should get a VCSO.
Right.
Or we even need a CISO, right? For our organization.
They've never heard CISO. They think you mispronounce CISO. They don't know what you're talking about. So you're right. Just assuming that they're going to come to you and say, we're ready to take our global risk and compliance seriously, or our governance risk and compliance seriously. It's never going to happen. Well, I know I need to let you go here, but if there's a sales rep or an account manager or VCIO who's listening to this and who's looking for inroads or upsells to their MSP clients, and they want to be able to do one of those assessments like you're describing, because what you're describing sounds pretty involved to actually develop. That's not just walking around with a clipboard.
So what I can
how do they do that?
What I can say, Brian, is if you go out to VCIO Toolbox's core site, right on the front page, we have a download for building your VCSO program. And included in there, it really outlines what the key responsibilities are of the VCSO and what the key deliverables are for a VCSO. So first and foremost, go download that guide and see, are you equipped to even provide those services directly? Or where can you provide directly? Where might you need some support? Or, hey, I could do these, I just need to get a little bit more. The other thing is, look at your verticals that you serve. Don't try to be everything to everybody. That's one big mistake that people do on the security side. And it's a little bit different because what's needed in CMMC doesn't necessarily translate 100% to ISO, and there's little variance there too. So, look at what you're doing. If you haven't done anything yet, take one of your best customers and assess them against either CSF 2.0 or CIS for implementation group number 1 and see what it feels like to do that assessment. And do you feel like you can get through it on your own? Those are some internal exercises. Do it on your own business. That's always helpful too.
This is just good advice, man. This is just good advice. I like that we talked a little bit more about creating more revenue inside of your existing client base, which is super important. We talked about upskilling as an executive of your IT company, but also future-proofing your MSP so that in 10 years you matter to somebody. Because if you're just an MSP and you're just sitting and waiting if you just want to keep doing the thing you've been doing since 2017, you will not be a business in 5 years because no one will need you. You've got to evolve, which technologists know, of course. But Brian, I think this has been super helpful. Is there any other, I guess the question is, if people want to get more from you, where do they go?
Well, if you want to get more from me, connect with me on LinkedIn, Brian Doyle, and search VCIO Toolbox, and you'll find me very easy. I'm happy to share things. Brian, you've been a guest. I also run the MSP Business School show where we talk about a lot of things around this as well. That's a definite place that I can help you personally. Those are 2 things I do just as labor of love. If you're interested in learning more about having a platform to guide you, certainly I encourage you to come in to VCIOtoolbox.com. We do offer trials. We offer demos. We do weekly demos on the GRC. But what I'll really close with also, Brian, is if you don't think that you should do this, your competitors are. Stats I can give you is 50% of our core QBR users. We launched QBR, of course, in advance of when we built our GRC system. 50% of our initial subscribers that just were QBR have now taken on GRC product set from us. And we're hearing from our customers now, even as we're doing our ramp camps, compliance is starting to take the forward-facing seat in the conversations with the client. And the business reviews are really just becoming a way to stay engaged in between these periods of bigger security conversation. So it's out there. It's starting to shift. This is the year we're starting to really see it tip the other way. And, if you're not looking at it, it's something I really encourage you to look at, whether it's with us or somebody else or even spreadsheets. Just start thinking about building that program.
I love it. Brian, you're a gem. Thanks for giving me such a long time, and thanks again for being on the podcast.
I appreciate it. A lot of fun, Brian. Always good to get together with you.